And so the intro to this chapter for Sarah says, don't complicate God's promise with your solution. And listen, okay, that title in and of itself came for my neck. Okay. And so I'm not just
The curl gods are in your favor. Hey y'all, unassuming today. The lesson for today is do not.
All right, good people. Welcome back to my channel, A Radical Relationship, where we are talking all things faith and all things lifestyle. Welcome back, friends. We are here for another segment where we are going to be discussing wisdom from women in the Bible. We still here with it, y'all. So this week we are in chapter 2, and chapter 2 is on Sarah. And Sarah, the story of Sarah can be found in Genesis, starting in Genesis 12 and through 23, but it's a lot of Abraham in there and some Sarah sprinkled in. But if you want to read about Sarah in the Bible, Genesis 12 through 23, chapters 12 through 23 is where she can be found. Since we're not going to be reading 11 chapters of the Bible in this, we'll do a little synopsis of Sarah. Okay, so one of the first things that it says about Sarah in the Bible is that she was beautiful. Okay, girl was beautiful. Okay, we know that. A few of the things that happened in the story of Sarah. She was married to Abraham, who was the father of nations. You know, everybody pretty much comes from Abraham, kind of thing. One of the huge points in their story, or one of the things that Sarah endured, was that we read about how Abraham lied about her being his sister. So they go off on this journey. He's like, hey, once we get there, they're going to see how beautiful you are, and they're going to want to kill me to have you. So let's say you're my sister and not my wife. She agrees. That actually happens a couple times, but God ends up exposing it and actually like coming to her rescue and things like that. A little nugget about that story is that when he lied about her being his sister, it says that Pharaoh takes her into his palace, and in biblical terms, a lot of the times that means that he had sex with her. So it's very likely that she had to give her body away as well. So sis was out here submitting. Okay. Some of the things that I pointed out about the character of Sarah. So the kind of whole thing with Sarah is that she was barren for a very long time. I guess barren. She didn't have kids. I wouldn't say that she couldn't. She didn't. She had been promised a son, from which all these nations were going to flow. And he wasn't nowhere to be found. Okay. And so she waited years and years and years before, she was blessed with that child. And so the intro to this chapter for Sarah says, don't complicate God's promise with your solution. And listen, okay, that title in and of itself came for my neck. Okay, don't complicate God's promise with your solution. It's like he got it. He don't need you around here messing stuff up and complicating things because you're trying to do his job and solve for things. So when we start to get into the chapter, it starts out with her talking about what she thought life was going to be like. You know, I married this man. He was even from my own clan. I'm young when they got married. So I thought that, you know, we would have kids, we would build this great family, raise these kids, and off into the distance that we go. They did go off into the distance, but it was not with any kids. One of the things that hit home when I was reading in this chapter is as she talked about not having children, she was like, okay, I'm 25. Okay, I'm 35. Okay, I'm 40. okay, I'm 45. Like, hello, when's this going to happen? You promised me a son. And then in the story, it says at age 60, I finally let it go. And I'm like, to even get to that point, where you still holding on to hope at age 60 when all these years ago, you were promised a son. Wow, amen for her holding on to the promise all of those years. I think it's cool because Abraham, he's a giant in the faith, father of many nations, and I'm like, yeah, but Sarah is the mother, okay? Like, Sarah was going to bear the son who was going to by which all of these nations were going to come. And so, I mean, Abraham is cool too, but my girl Sarah, like, she was the mother of the nations. So one of the questions that she asked in the chapter is, have you ever felt like you needed to help God? And she's like, of course you have. We all do. And I know that I can really relate to that. And it all ties back to impatience. And so what happened with Sarah is that after all of these years of not having a child, she goes into Abraham and she's like, you know what? It don't look like it's about to happen. Why don't you go over here, take my servant Hagar, and y'all have a child, and the promise can come to fruition through this child. God didn't say Hagar was going to have a son through which the nations were going to come. He said, you, Sarah, were going to have a son. And so I see the fear in her rising up, and now she's starting to try to control the situation because it don't look like what she thought she heard from God. It was like, hold up. Okay. Well, I thought that he said that I was going to have a son, but maybe Abraham going to have a son and it's going to be through Hagar. But she completely twisted it, but it was out of fear. Out of fear, she started to try to control the situation to help God out and make the promise happen. Who's guilty of that? I am guilty of that. I know that when I start to see myself or feel myself get controlling, I'm like, okay, there's some fear here somewhere. There's something that I'm not trusting God with, that I think I need to take this situation into my own hands. Not only did she start to take it into her own hands, Hagar now gets to have the child. Abraham went and had sex with the servant. She gets pregnant. She has the child. And now she starts looking down on Sarah. And Sarah is in there talking bad to her. Sarah is not laying down like no weak chick. And I can relate to that, okay? But Sarah was not right, because Sarah was the whole reason why Hagar had this baby to begin with. So not only does Sarah go in and try to control the situation, then she gets bitter and gets upset at Hagar and Abraham about what's going on. She's like, you went in and slept with her. And it's like, yeah, because you told me to, but hey, that's how we get, okay? And it's so funny because it said that the book talked about how when she started to get bitter as a result of her own actions, and she started to blame everybody else, Hagar because she had the son, and Abraham because he slept with her. But what was funny to me, because I can see myself doing this, Sarah was like, we'll let God decide who is right, okay, between me and you. And I'm like, I can relate. Like, okay, cool. You don't agree with me? We'll let God decide. That's cool. Do you? You the one in there slept with the servant. That's cool. You know you was wrong. You know you shouldn't have listened to me. Ain't that how we get sometimes, ladies? Like, we are hilarious. So I can relate to that. I can relate to, all right, I thought I heard something that sounded good and I thought the promise was cool up until the point that, like, it ain't looking good no more. So now I got to figure out how to makeshift this thing. But the reality is that when you start feeling like you got to help God out, you're simply not surrendered. You're simply not trusting him. You simply don't think that it's going to happen. Like, that's just the gut level, honest truth, that if you feel like you got to help him out, and if you are someone who tends to control the situation and can see yourself and Sarah in that way, you're not surrendered, sis. That's just what it is. And so we have to keep fighting to get surrendered. And in Sarah's situation, I can absolutely understand why she would feel this way. It's years and years later, and she still ain't got no sign of a son. So I'm like, yeah, I can understand. It was tough because God told her what, but he didn't tell her when. He said you was going to have a son, but he didn't say it was going to be in 2 years. So that wrestle to trust God's timing. I know one of the questions at the end, I think of the chapter was like, why did we think it had to be so long? You know, and like, who knows what the impact of the timing was in the grand scheme of eternity. You know, there could have been so many reasons why the timing that her son did come was perfect. But, you know, she getting older and it's just not looking good. So, of course, you know, I feel her. Like, I've been pretty faithful, actually, God. Like, I've been waiting by now, I'm like, about 90 years. You know, like anybody in her situation can understand. The other thing that I thought was funny was that her faithlessness showed, because there's a passage in the Bible when the two men come, they're talking to Abraham, and they're like, I don't know if it was one of the men or someone else. But they're like, hey, when I return this time next year, maybe. But they're like, when I return this time next year, she's gonna be pregnant, or she's gonna have had a child, or something like that. And Sarah's in the back cooking, and she hears it and she laughs. And God is like, why did you laugh? She was like, I ain't laugh. First of all, you're faithless, okay? Because they done said that you're going to have a child. She's like, I'm 90 years old. They talking about I'm going to have a child. They got me weak. She like, people got great grandkids by this age. You talking about I'm going to have a child. And then she lied, talking about she didn't laugh because she was trying to save face. She didn't want that faithlessness to show. Who can relate? I can relate, trying to save face, but it's like your faithlessness is peeking out, boo. We see you laughing at the promises of God because you're that hopeless about, or that faithless even, about what God can actually do. And that ain't cool. You know, like that's a rough place to be in. So let's talk about some of these bangers in the chapter, okay? So one of the headlines was, don't try to get ahead of God when he isn't moving fast enough for you. And one of the things that really resonated with me in that passage was that she said, I can see your hand in the past, but I can't see it in the future. Hindsight is 20/20, right? She's like, if I can look back and remember, yeah, I see that you have been faithful. I know what you're capable of. But if I'm looking forward and I can't see, nah, I'm not here. So I'm just like, so true, you know, like if I'm reflecting, yep, I get it. I see it. I can be faithful. I know that God is true to his word. I believe it. But if I got to look forward into something that I can't see with no reminders, I just got to believe that it's going to happen. Lost me, Doc. But that's exactly the kind of faith that God calls us to. Second header. Our surrogate solutions are always poor substitutes for God's promises. Y'all, they are going in this chapter. Our surrogate solutions, your little cheap substitutes, they're always poor. Your little cheap solutions, they're always poor substitutes for God's promises. It's like, keep your little cheap stuff over there. It's always gonna be a poor substitute for God. And then one of the things that it talked about along those headers were the long-term consequences. She talked about how now our sons are at war, you know, her son and Hagar's son, and that continued on for years and years and years amongst the nations. Long-term consequences to her disobedience. Did nobody tell you to have your husband sleep with that woman? And so there's always something to keep in mind, that like there are consequences to our disobedience. And with God, we are on a need to know basis. Okay, if you don't need to know, deal with it. And not even just deal with it, but also just like, and I've been praying about this even recently, that like, God, I just want to be able to rest. I just want to be able to rest because I know that you got it. I know that you got me, but that's not my nature. My nature is to plan and to try to figure it out. And when I feel that coming back up, I have to dial it back again and say, okay, no, God's got me. God's got me. Third header in this chapter: when you must wait, focus on God's character, not your circumstances. That banger right there is what got me through my divorce. Focusing on God's character and not the circumstances, because if I'm gonna look at the circumstances, it's a problem for me. Like if I look at the circumstances, I felt like I did everything that I was supposed to do. I felt like I was faithful. I waited. I was pure. If I look at the circumstances, this is pretty jacked up. But if I look at God's character, there's hope. There's life after this. He is faithful. He causes all things to work for the good of those that love him. So I have nothing to fear. I have only hope for the future because I know and trust God's characters. When I read about the God of the Bible, I see him coming through for people over and over again. So I have to trust that he's going to be that same God for me. And you have to trust that he's going to be that same God for you. Okay? God's miracles happen only when we're faced with the impossible. Now, this quote took me out. Let me find it. Here it is. So if you're in a tough spot, if you're uncomfortable, and the impossible is the only thing that can help you, then you are a candidate for a miracle. Hello, hello, hello. Anybody hear that? Hello. You are a candidate for a miracle, okay? If you're in a tough spot, if you're uncomfortable, if the impossible is the only thing that can happen, you are a candidate for a miracle, okay? Like, that is so exciting. Like, little old me, I get to be somebody that God works on behalf of, like I get to see God's faithfulness proved. I'm a candidate. You a candidate. We're all candidates, for testimonies, for God to work in miraculous ways in our lives, especially when we're in what can seem like super hopeless circumstances. So hold your chin up, sis, okay? A couple of the quotes from this chapter. It's easy to believe in God's blessings, but not always his timing. I was praying through that this morning. Like, God, I don't understand. I don't get it. Help me to understand why now, It's easy to believe in the blessing. Amen. I'm still praying through that one myself. And then another part in the chapter said, despite her faithlessness, God was still faithful. Despite her pride peeking out, despite her faithlessness peeking out, despite her trying to take control of the situation, God still kept the promise. That lady still bore a son in her old age, and God fulfilled the promise. That is the hope. That is the guarantee that God's word will never fail. If he said it, that settles it, okay? And y'all don't want me to play that gospel song from back in the day. All right. So much goodness with Sarah. I loved working through this chapter because I saw the journey. Again, I saw the journey. Like, she's considered a pillar, a giant of the faith in so many ways. And it was not a perfect path. And that is what continues to inspire me and encourage me as I read about these women, is that their paths were not perfect. Their paths were not ideal. But what we do see is God's faithfulness proved in their lives. And that's amazing and such an encouragement to me. And I pray that it is such an encouragement to you as well. So just a couple of the questions that I'll leave us out on for personal reflection and that kind of thing. It says, I mentioned one, why do you think God delayed the process for so long? And maybe even if you're in a waiting season, think through that. Like, why might God be delaying this process? What might be benefits? We can think about all the things that may not be great about having to wait, but what about the benefits? And then question 5, how do you usually deal with frustration? Do you lash out? Do you retreat and seethe? Do you try to take control? Do you give up? I know for me, when I'm frustrated, I just want to soothe myself. So like, give me some sweets. Let me just like veg out tonight. Let me just watch some shows on TV and just have whatever I would like, and then I can move on. And I'm gonna try to take control in the morning and fix it. So it's a little bit of everything with me. And then finally, what disappointment are you currently dealing with? How might others be able to help you deal with it in a God-honoring way? Disappointment is never easy. It's always hard. It's always rough. You are expected to wrestle, but how can your wrestle be God-honoring? Okay? Hopefully that helps somebody, okay? If you have made it to the end of this video and you are not yet subscribed, be sure to hit that button. Check me out on all of the various social medias, really just Facebook and Instagram. I ain't on anything else like that. And until next time, we are out.